Hi, I'm Terry, one of the consumer technology specialists here at Mid-Continent Public Library, and today we want to learn about two key concepts that you really want to use when you are writing your Excel formulas. So let's get started by learning about absolute references and order of operations. Looking at today's spreadsheet, we can see that we have our example company, ABC Company, and that the information we are working with right now is for its previous year. Looking at column A, we see a listing of its 5 regions, and then in columns B, C, D, and E, we can see that we have each quarter's information as well. In column F, we have room to supply regional totals, and we'll quickly review how to write a formula to supply those totals. We'll also see in row 9 here that we have quarter totals that also need to be written. In column G, we have a current year goal, which is to take those regional totals for the previous year and increase those totals by 5% for our current year. Let's start by completing the previous year's information, and to do that, let's start with F4, where we can write the first formula for the regional totals. Now, looking at this, I think it's pretty obvious that we want to add the numbers that are in row 4 here for the regional totals, and we could write a really simple formula to do that, but it would still take more time than if we go to a very special button on the ribbon. So let's go to that button in the far right of our ribbon in the editing group, and it's named AUTOSUM. Now, AUTOSUM looks like the Greek sigma or maybe a fancy E, but when we click on the AUTOSUM button, it automatically puts a function, the sum function, into our cell. Now, looking at this, we can see that it follows the pattern of all formulas. It starts with an equal sign. The math operation has the name of sum, and that operation adds numbers together, basically. Inside the parentheses, we have an argument, and in this case, the argument contains the range of cells that we want to add together. So it says we want to start at B4, we want to end at E4, and the colon says, well, let's also include all of these cells in between. That is precisely what we want to do. The other thing to note is that as soon as you click that AutoSum button, when it comes into a cell, it automatically looks up to see if there are numbers and to the left to see if there are numbers. And it found numbers to the left in this particular instance. Well, I'm going to go up to the formula bar and then to the left where I can see a check mark. And the check mark lets me enter information into a cell and then keep that cell the one that is active. Well, here is our first total. Pretty remarkable how fast and easy that was. But now let's copy that formula down the column. And to do that, we're going to go to the lower right of F4 where there's a little square, and that is called the fill handle. Now, when I rest my mouse on top of it, my mouse becomes a very thin, kind of small plus sign. I can simply click and drag down, and now I have totals for all of the other rows, for the other regions. If I double click in one of these cells, it shows me the formula that has been copied in, and yes, it has equal sum, but notice how it has changed the cell references to refer to row 5, or if I come down here, now again, it's the same formula, the same function, but it has now changed to refer to row 7. Just amazing how smart Excel really is. Well, let's now go to B9, where we can do basically the same thing to add up our quarter information as well. So now that I've clicked in B9, I'm going to go back up to AutoSum and click it. This time AutoSum is looking up, and just by the color coding, I can tell that it has selected the cells that I want to add together. It starts with the equal sign. We have the math operation that we want to use, sum. And in the argument this time, we have the cell range of B4 through B8. And of course, the colon means include all of those cells between B4 and B8. We can go back up to our check mark and click it. Then let's go to the lower right of that cell, find the fill handle, rest our mouse on it, and click and drag across. And we've now completed that previous year information. One thing to note is just like when we copied those cells down column F, if we look in row 9 and we do a double click, we can see again that Excel, in copying those formulas, has automatically adjusted the cell references. Now this is called using relative references, and a lot of people use this probably over 90% of the time because they're simply copying from cell to cell the information that they need. But relative references simply means that when we copy, we're using references that are relative to where the original formula was created. Well, from here, now let's look at our current year's goal and how we can get that 5% increase calculated. To help us determine what our current year goal is, I've added two columns that will just help us figure out how to write a final formula. In column G, I've written 5% because that's the increase that we want to have. And then in H, I've left room so that we can figure out what that 5% is in numbers or in dollars. And let's start there. So let's see the amount of the increase. Well, it's 5% of the regional total. Anytime we have a math problem that is a percent of something means that we're going to multiply that percent times the number. So, okay, that means equals regional total is F4 times G4. We'll click the check mark. I'll find the fill handle, click and drag down. And so now we know in numbers what that 5% really means. Now, for me to figure out how to get that current year goal, what's the actual number we're looking for? Well, we want to take the regional totals and add to it the amount of the increase. So in I4, I'm going to type equals F4 plus H4, click our check mark, and use our fill handle to drag down. And now we have a pretty good idea of what we need to do for this year's goal. Let's step back a little bit and look at this spreadsheet. And really, it's useful, it's helpful, and you might decide to stop here even though we've added in those two extra columns. But as I look at column G, and I guess especially column G with its repeated 5% values, I think, boy, there's got to be a better way to do this. Because with 5 regions, it's sort of doable, but let's say that we had 100 regions instead, so that we have that 5% 100 times. Well, that is so repetitious. Surely there's a better way to write that formula. And indeed, there is. So let me go to another worksheet where now I've removed all of those repeated 5% values and placed it just one time in J2. We still have our amount of increase column, and in H we still have the formula. Let's go up to the formula bar to look, that adds the regional totals to the amount of increase. So all we need to do is determine the amount of increase using J2. Well, we'll start with equals, we'll type F4, we know we need to multiply, and then we're going to use J2 for our 5%. And then we can go to the left of the formula bar and click the check mark. This is good. Our goal is now showing accurately. And I'm going to find the fill handle, click and drag down, and we have a problem. Well, let's look at G5 where things start going wrong and double click. And we can see that, okay, we still have a reference here for F5. That's correct. And then it says times J3. Well, that's off a cell. Okay, well, now let's go to the next cell. Let's double click here. And again, this is F6. It looks great. That's right. But it's referring to, oh, darn, J4. So, oh, okay. Well, I see what's going on. And what has happened is, while our formula is using relative references for column F, and that works correctly, we're finding that it also is using relative references for column J. And we only have a value in J2, not all of those other cells that the relative reference is referring to. Well, let's go back up to G4, and I'm going to double click so you can see that formula fairly easily. I'm going to click in front of the J and then go to my keyboard where above the numbers I can find the function keys, and I'm going to press F4. With F4, I get a $ in front of the J and in front of the 2, and this creates absolute references. Now, the $ is not a formatting $, it's a formula $. And what that $ in front of the J means, no matter how we copy this formula, no matter which way, upside down, backwards, right, left, whatever, don't change that reference to J. And then the same thing with the 2. That $ says no matter how we copy this formula, don't change the reference to the 2. Well, the F4, when you press it, actually cycles through some other options as well. So, for example, it has only a $ in front of the 2 or only a $ in front of the J, and those two are called mixed references. If I press F4 again, it takes the $ off completely, but I'm going to press the F4 one more time so that I can be sure to have my absolute reference to J2. Now I'm going to go back up to the check mark to the left of the formula bar, find my fill handle, and click and drag down. And just like that, we now have the amount of increase using the reference in J2. So let's see how that looks. So here, it's referring to F, what is that, 5, and J2. If I double click here, it's referring to F7 and J2. Wow, that is really nifty. Now, what I would really like to do is figure out how to combine what we've done in column G with the formula in column H and have a kind of more complex formula that does several kinds of math at one time. But to do that, we need to look at order of operations first. The order of operations is the way Excel does math. On the left-hand side, you see a phrase that will help you remember the order that Excel does perform those operations. So please excuse my dear Aunt Sally means that Excel will first look at what is in parentheses. Then excuse stands for exponents. And notice that with Excel, the exponents are written a little bit differently. So if I want to write a number squared, instead of having the little 2 kind of above and to the right of the number, I will put caret 2. Or if I want to write a number cubed, I will write the number caret and a 3. Next you have my dear, which stands for multiply and or divide from left to right. And finally, Aunt Sally stands for add and or subtract from left to right. Let's look at 2 quick examples of how the order of operations affects a formula. For our first example, we have 3 plus 3 times 3. Well, from left to right, 3 plus 3 is 6, times 3 is 18. But let's go to the correct answer and be sure to check it. And when we do, we find that our correct answer is 12. Oh, well, please, my dear Aunt Sally. So multiply and or divide before we add or subtract. So 3 times 3 is 9, plus 3 is 12. Wow, a difference of 6. If I had 100 formulas and I had the same kind of idea carried out in those 100 formulas, we could be off significantly, couldn't we? Well, let's look at another one here. Okay, I have 6 minus 4 divided by 2. Well, okay, left to right. 6 minus 4 is 2. Divided by 2 is 1. And the correct answer is 4. Well, how did Excel get that? Oh, yeah, divide before I subtract, correct? So I'm going to do 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 minus 2 is 4. Again, this is a significant difference carried over several cells. Now that we know how Excel does math and how it uses the math operators, let's go to a new worksheet and kind of a copy of that original spreadsheet, except we now have in I2 the 5% for that 5% increase in profit. And as we look at this spreadsheet, we can even see that below it, I've written kind of a rough outline of how we're going to write that formula. So we're going to take the regional total and we're going to add to it the 5% increase. The way we calculate the 5% increase is to take the regional total and multiply it by 5%. In G4, then we're going to put in our equal sign for our formula and then add in F4 for that regional totals. Our outline down here says we're going to add, so we need to put in the plus sign. And then we need to calculate the 5% increase, which is the regional total, times, find the multiply button, and 5% is I2. We know from experience now that I2 needs to be an absolute reference so that all of our formulas will say I2 and not use a relative reference. We'll click in front of the I, go to our keyboard, find the function keys, find F4, press it. Now we have that dollar sign in front of the I and in front of the 2. And then we need to double check our order of operations since we have two math operators. We have an add and a multiply, but as I look at this, we definitely want to take that regional totals, F4, times I2, the profit increase, and do that first before we add that answer to our regional totals. This works the way it is, but if you're at all concerned about what is going to be done first, you could add in, and so we'll do that. You could add in a parenthesis around that multiplication problem. Now we can click our check mark and find the fill handle and click and drag down. Now we have that spreadsheet that is correct with its final current goals for the year using absolute value and the order of operations. For more information about Excel and Excel formulas, be sure to explore our online resources at mymcpl.org/online learning. There you'll find resources such as Universal Class, lynda.com, Who Knew It, and Learning Express Library. Be sure to watch next Wednesday, July 8th, as Paige presents Back to Work, Exploring Resume Builders.